So, continuing with America Comes of Age today, remember to be on the lookout for these key terms. Whenever you see them, pay special attention and be able to do these things: describe, explain, analyze, etc. So, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about Woodrow Wilson today, President Woodrow Wilson. You've seen his name come up with some of the other issues that we've talked about in the progressive era, but here's a little bit more about sort of what his goals and beliefs were. So, Republicans, Roosevelt and Taft, introduced the country to forceful progressive presidents. Democrat Woodrow Wilson used the expanded power of the presidency to promote a far reaching reform agenda. And some of Wilson's economic and antitrust measures are still important in American life today. This is another map of the election of 1912. So you can see how Roosevelt and Taft are really sort of hurting each other and allowing for Wilson to become president. Although even if you combine those other two parties, it looks like people are ready for Wilson, especially when it comes to the electoral vote. Where is Taft sort of going to leave us? Well, Taft is going to be more of a trustbuster than Roosevelt. He will establish the Children's Bureau of 1912. He's a conservationist. He'll establish the Bureau of Mines in 1910. Roosevelt, again, breaks with Taft in 1911. And in 1912, he runs against Taft for the Republican nomination. And when he doesn't get it, he joins the ticket as a Progressive Party candidate, or as he called it, the Bull Moose Party. Wilson and Roosevelt are different from one another. Roosevelt will campaign on something called New Nationalism, which is saying, yes, you've heard of the Square Deal, but I also believe that government should intervene to promote the Square Deal. Whereas Wilson will capitalize and campaign on the idea of new freedom, where he says government has gone too far and we should limit government, which is interesting because Wilson also expands the presidency. Roosevelt and Taft will split the Republican vote. Wilson loses the popular vote, but wins the Electoral College. Easier to do when you have a strong third party. So here is Wilson's new freedom. He called it the triple wall, fighting the triple wall of privilege. So in this entry here, it says, according to Wilson, most Americans are trapped inside what he called a triple wall of privilege, fighting against high tariffs, trusts, and high finance. Wilson wants to break down these walls with his new freedom plan. So what is it new freedom from? It's new freedom from the triple wall of privilege. He wants to make America more affordable for all Americans. So look to the right. It says trusts or companies. Companies were still limiting competition for small businesses and keeping overall prices high by forming large trusts. At the bottom, high finance. People in America did not have money to pay for the interest rates on loans and borrowing. And then on the left, tariff costs were too high for most Americans to afford, yet tariffs were the main source of revenue for the federal government. Wilson's reforms. He's going to want to reform tariffs. Again, it's part of his triple wall of privilege busting, his new freedom. He will actually go to Congress, which is a really bold move, to stand before them and lobby for lower tariffs. In 1913, you have the Underwood Tariff, which lowers tariffs and provides for a federal graduated income tax, which is going to be provided for with the 16th Amendment. To the Constitution. We talked about the 17th and the 19th Amendment in previous conversations, so this is the 16th. It essentially says that the federal government can have an income tax and then do whatever it wants with that income tax. Reform the banks, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. There will be a new central banking system known as the Federal Reserve. Banks will keep some deposits as insurance, and regional reserve banks and a central bank will control monetary policy. See if there's anything else I want to mention. There's some more details about the Underwood Act and the Federal Reserve Act here as well. So more about the Federal Reserve System. Which part of the Federal Reserve System determines the reserve requirements for member banks? You have a board of governors as well as 12 Federal Reserve banks, and all nationally chartered banks must be members. You've probably seen commercials for banks where it says members FDIC. That has to do with insurance, but it's all connected to a Federal Reserve System. The Wilson years. Wilson will take Roosevelt's path when it comes to dealing with trusts. He will regulate trusts more than he will bust trusts. He will ask Congress to establish the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC, to appease progressives who want more control over larger companies or corporations. So will allow the federal government to monitor business, but he will appoint conservatives to oversee the commission, so it doesn't really do much. Congress, a largely progressive Congress, doesn't think that Wilson's policies are strong enough against trusts. They will then pass the Clayton Antitrust Act, which is stricter than the Sherman Antitrust Act. It says that you can't discriminate based on price. Unions are exempt from the Clayton Antitrust Act. So, the government, authority, and property rights. It says that in the progressive era, comprehensive zoning gave the government power to regulate the uses of privately owned land. We talked about zoning laws before. 68 cities will adopt zoning ordinances. It says in this area you can build this, in this area you can build this. It's what we see in even our small local governments, why you don't have, large towering buildings right next to a small neighborhood, right? So it says the 42-story equitable building was built without regard to the neighboring area, and it sort of becomes an example of what New York City looks like before zoning laws versus what it looks like after. Political reforms of the progressive had a lasting effect on the American political system. The initiative, referendum, recall, and the 17th and 19th Amendments expand voters' influence. Progressive reforms also paved the way for future trends. Starting in this period, the federal government grew to offer more protection to Americans, but at the same time gained control over people's lives. So here you have all of these progressive amendments. We haven't talked about the 18th yet, but we will. You have the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th. The 16th Amendment gives Congress the power to collect taxes on income. The 17th Amendment institutes the direct election of senators by the people of each state. The 18th Amendment banned the making, selling, and transportation of alcoholic beverages in the U.S. And then the 19th Amendment gives women the right to vote in all elections. So 18th Amendment is prohibition. That's what we will be getting to. And I'm willing to bet that you are surprised that there was a 16th Amendment or a 17th Amendment. I know that you knew that those numbered amendments exist, but it's surprising that there was an amendment to collect a federal income tax because we're all familiar with it. It's not that there wasn't an income tax before, it just wasn't federal. And then the 17th Amendment, the idea that you did not used to elect a senator in your state, right? That the legislature used to do that on your behalf is an interesting idea. Again, we're allowing more people to directly experience democracy in the progressive era. Not all people, but more people.